Hi, my name is Pauline Broberg. I'm a music therapist. I live out in Paoli area, Pennsylvania. My husband is Robert, and Dan is my daughter's mentor.
And Pauline, it's fair to say you and I have known each other a while. You and I went to Penn together and we're in the writing program
That's
together.
right.
Let's start by talking a little bit about what it is that you do as a music therapist and how you got into doing that, because you've had quite a lot of lives since we graduated from Penn.
So I'm a music therapist. I've been doing music therapy, hospice music therapy for the last almost 10 years now. And that means I go to facilities and homes at a very vulnerable time in people's lives when they're dying. And I play for them and I use music for therapeutic purposes. So if they just want to listen to music, they can find any YouTube song they want. But if you want somebody to help you process what's going on with your loved one or what you're feeling, then a therapist can be very useful. So I drive out. Often I haven't seen people before. And with mom dying in bed, I say, so what songs do you think about when you think of your mom? Why do you think of those songs? Why are they meaningful for you? Would you like to sing the song to your mom? One of the most powerful things is taking the songs that people heard their mothers sing to them when they were younger and having them at a different stage in life sing them back to their mother and thank the mother or the father for the contributions they've made to their life. So these are really gut-wrenching, very vulnerable moments, and you can turn that dying process, which is very difficult for people, into something exquisitely beautiful and special that people talk about for years. That's what I do.
And when we started talking, and this is true, that dying, which is it can be a very frightening process, and very often is, but dying and beautiful don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. This is one of the things that you said. Can you
That's
elaborate a
right.
little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, dying is a time just like being born. It's very vulnerable. You're not exactly sure what's going to happen. You're waiting for a huge change, and you want your mom to dad to die comfortably. And so hospice is not one person, but by state regulations, it's of course the nurse, and then there's a chaplain and social worker. But many hospices turn towards alternative therapies. We offer massage therapy, which can be very soothing at the end of life. Just being touched when, especially when no one's around, your son or daughter may live far away, but you have somebody that's stroking your head and telling you that we're going to make sure you're comfortable and that we've lived a full life, and we feel the love in the room by looking at all the photographs. It's going to be very comforting things, and you can really feel the person shifting energies, shifting gears, and readying up to die. And it's just such an incredible thing to be part of a team that offers those alternative services to people when they're dying. Because just talking is fine, but it doesn't go near as far as music goes.
Yeah, and absolutely. And music plays such a huge role in your life and in Dahlia's life as well, your daughter, my mentee. Talk a little about your music and how that's been a part of your life. Then we'll get to Dahlia in a minute. The instruments you play, how the instruments and singing inform and impact your work with
Sure.
your elderly patients.
Oh, that's a great question. And really, my love for music started way back before I had children. And basically, I spent after university about 7, 8 years traveling around the world and living in poor countries. And I found that in places where I couldn't communicate with people readily, music was a great way to connect to people that spoke languages that I didn't. And it doesn't matter what country you're in, it doesn't matter where you are. Upbeat is upbeat, sad is sad, minor chords are minor chords. And people have these universal responses to music and use them in negotiation, reconciliation work for groups that didn't like each other, and ended up using them in China for all kinds of things to share Western technology, Western ideals with scientists that were planning on coming to the United States that I was preparing them for. And music is just such a wonderful languageless language, if, for lack of better words. And you can be playing your guitar, your piano, your vina, whatever you're playing, and have somebody jump in on the erhu, the Chinese two-stringed instrument, and suddenly you're talking in ways that are wordless and timeless and speak across universes of miscommunication and understanding at the same time. So it's really a powerful thing to be able to play music and express those musics in different cultures.
Yeah, and you made so many beautiful points in that, speaking across languages and across cultures. And what instruments do you play? I know you play a lot of them, but
Well, I started on the violin, Dan, and then my mother had a fit when I was 18 because I told her no more violin for me. I was in gypso, Greater Use of Boston Symphony Orchestra, all these orchestras and stuff. But I wanted my weekends and I wanted to date. So I told my mom I was giving up the violin and I was going to play, wait for it, the fiddle. Well, she didn't
Okay.
like that very much. That was seen as the worst possible thing that could happen to her at that time. But the fiddle was definitely the right move for me. And from the fiddle, I ended up playing all kinds of instruments, starting on piano, then violin, fiddle. Then in college at the University of Wisconsin, I played the veena because I was interested in going to India someday. In China, I studied erhu. I've studied a lot of different instruments, but really the primary in terms of what the American Music Therapy Association requires you to play is guitar. So that's what we bring to bedside. It's much easier than schlepping an electric piano, a chair, and setting up and moving furniture around. So
Yeah.
really,
Or a
guitar.
9-foot grand Steinway. It's a lot easier than schlepping that one in as well.
Yeah, exactly right. Yes.
Absolutely. Just speaking of languages, to give our the moms listening and the dads too some context, you're a dual national, correct? Are you a Dutch and American national?
I was 7 or 8 when I immigrated to the United States. My dad taught at a university and schlepped us with him, and we ended up in the Boston area. And that was really hard, that shifting from Dutch to English. And my parents spoke Dutch for a long time until somebody told them that they should start speaking English with us. Not a good move. But in any case, you learn French in school, you learn Spanish, and then before you know it, you're in those countries and you're using them. And if you go to India, you have to know Telugu, at least to the part of India I was going to. So I studied that at the University of Wisconsin. I knew I was going to China, so I studied that at Harvard Night School. Really, if you can't converse with people in their native language, it's really problematic. You're always having someone translate for you, and they not necessarily really translating on a level that is either correct or meaningful or both. And so it's really nice if you can even say a few things in languages. But by the time I got to China, I was pretty proficient in it and ended up being a announcer for Chinese television, which was really fun and opened a lot of doors for me. So language is really critical. Having those language skills and being able to use them has been a life-changing.
What's your hit on linguistic fluency and how that dovetails or kind of miter joints with cultural fluency?
It's really funny. There's always been the argument between Chomsky and Sapir-Whorf about to what extent language is something that just generates across cultures and really doesn't mean much, or Sapir-Whorf saying, no, your language is your worldview. I tend to agree more with that latter perspective, that really language is a worldview. There are words in Dutch that I still use today because I can't find an English equivalent. And there's words in Chinese that it just gives such a different feeling to reality. No pronouns and no plurals and no verb conjugations. It's just the magical language, and it sings. It's got tones. 床前明月光，疑是地上霜。举头望明月，低头思故乡. It's just the most beautiful language in the world, I think. So definitely, language has a lot to do with worldview and how you absorb reality.
Absolutely. I'm sure the moms listening who are Mandarin speakers are going to get a lot out of that.
That's a really
One of
famous
the many languages I don't speak, although I do speak 5. We overlap on a couple of them. English is one.
Mm-hmm.
My English is okay. Your English is very good, I have to say. But I'm thinking of a very specific Dutch word that you taught me not too long ago. Nietsan, am I pronouncing that correctly?
The Dutch word that I always share with people is gezellig.
I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. And what does that mean, or how does that map to English, just out of curiosity?
Gezellig means cozy, literally. But you use it in Dutch sentences like, let's cozy spend some time talking about mentoring. Let's cozy eat spaghetti tonight. Let's cozy, gezellig, doing something in a gezellig way means that you enjoy it, that you like the other person you're doing it with, that is something that you want to do, and you just don't have that in English. If I said to you, hey, Dan, let's cozy sit down and talk about mentorship, you might be like, what are you talking about? But a Dutch person would know exactly what you're talking about. And you can be in a certain place at a certain time together with somebody and just turn to them and say, gezellig, which means, isn't this cozy?
Right.
But it's just the word cozy. It's a beautiful word. It's a beautiful word. And you grow up with that. Your mother, your father, constantly in your young life trying to create moments of everything being gezellig.
It's a wonderful thing. And with so many of the kids with whom I work, your daughter included, many of these kids come from multicultural families. Some come from double cultures, or some are first generation or second generation. I'm thinking particularly of like kids who come from Indian families where they may speak one or more of the Indian languages. And just like any other languages, there are words that don't necessarily map. Words like apple or table or pencil do, but there are concepts that don't. And being able to speak across, I'm thinking of Japan, which is my second home, much like China is for you, where there's Japanglish and Chinglish or Spanglish, where it's wonderful to be able to communicate across. Would you say, what's your hit on that when it comes to young people and just the fun of doing that? What's your take on that, having done
I think it's really important that all kids study a second language, and preferably if they have the language that their parents speak, if they cannot lose that, that's something that's just so important because it will connect them to their forefathers and their foremothers. And that's a really wonderful gift in life, to feel that connection with history and connection with family. So really important to study different languages, really important to get out of your comfort zone at some point in your life, especially the Western-Eastern divide. I think I've learned more. I traveled in Belfast and North Pole, and then I was in Israel, but they're all still very Western countries. But it was really going to India that was really a paradigm shift in terms of my thinking, my perception of the world. Nepal added to that, and China was a complete new way of looking at the world and looking at social relations. And really, that's what it means to be, for me, to be alive, to see the different ways of looking at reality and not thinking, oh, in the West, this is important. You can let go of a lot of things that you suddenly realize aren't so important that you thought were really important when you were only looking from a Western lens. And that's growth. That's stepping into new ways of solving problems, new ways of connecting to other people. And that's a lifelong journey and something to cherish.
But you spent a good amount of time in India. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that started and how that unpacked over time, both for you and for your kids?
I laugh about how it started because it had a very rough start. Israel and India had no diplomatic relations, and I was going to India from Israel. So I ended up flying through Egypt. When I arrived in India, my luggage had been stolen. I had no passport. I had no money. I ended up at the airport. The embassy was closed. Long story. 3 weeks later, I had been adopted by the YMCA, yes, in Bombay. It was called Bombay back then. And I think I waited about 3 weeks for money to finally reach me via a friend of my dad's who was teaching at university. After 6 weeks, and I had a wonderful time. I went to Agra during that time, really got to know Bombay, which I wasn't planning to visit at all. And through the family, the professor that finally came up with my dad's money saw things that I never would have seen if I rushed off to Andhra Pradesh. Took the train all across India, ended up in Andhra Pradesh in a place called Vishakhapatnam. It's an eastern seaport city. And I went there only because I knew that the University of Wisconsin had a Telugu program, a language program there. And I knew I'd be safe there. When you're traveling as a woman, when you're 26, 27 years old, without internet, and you've got physical dollar bills in your pocket, it changes how you travel. So I really wanted to go to places where there were other students. If I got sick, I wanted to be able to, for them to take care of me. I spent time teaching at Andhra Pradesh University part-time in the International Studies Department. I lived with 4 other women from the University of Wisconsin. It was really not seen as appropriate to have an apartment on my own. During the day, I got really very close to the Jollery fishermen who lived on the beach, spent many days with them, and watched them put their boats out to sea and come back 2 weeks later with fish. Spent a lot of time in the villages with the women selling fish, and beautiful mornings of just waking up in mud huts, and just a completely different way of looking at life and experiencing life, and very slow, very focused on every small detail of reality, which was so different than anything I'd ever experienced before.
Yeah. And fair to say you stand out not only as a Caucasian Westerner, but you're quite tall. Did that play a role in that as well?
It plays a role everywhere you go. It plays a role in airplanes. Your knees touch the seats in front of you unless you get a first class ticket. But besides that, it really plays most of a role in China. When I went to China, it was in 86, and I was just seen as a monster, not just because of my skin, which would actually turn pink when you touched it. On the bus, people would come up and just, you'd understand them. Is it getting red? Yes, it is. It does. It gets red. It gets red when you push on the skin. But beyond that, just being so tall was something that was seen as magical. Wow, there's somebody so tall. When I did presentations for Jiangsu television, They actually had the other actresses and actors stand on like boxes next to me so that it wouldn't be so awkward that I was 2 feet, 3 feet taller.
That's quite a bit taller. I think
Quite a bit taller. Yeah. 6 feet is
you're
pretty
about
tall.
6 feet. Yeah, about 6 feet. Um, let's talk about Dahlia, my mentee, and your youngest daughter. Yes, you are now an empty nest. You and Robert, your incredible husband Robert, are now empty
Yeah.
nesters. And
We are
beautiful.
empty nesters. Exactly. And it's so wonderful after
How many
having
kids? How
six
many kids?
children together, but we raised 9 kids because we took 3 others in along the way. And a lot of people say, oh, I know a lot of people, they cry. It's so sad, but I'm so happy I'm an empty nester. It's the first time in 30 years, Robert and I have really been together just at night saying, what do you want for dinner? Instead of coming home after a long day and the kids say, what's for dinner? It's just a totally different dynamic, and constantly feeling you have to fix things for your kids. And then there's teachers meetings. Like your life is just so much time is robbed that you might want to use to develop yourself. I didn't start working in music therapy, working at all until Dahlia turned 5, because I believed I could provide the best education for my kids until they went to school. And it wasn't really when she left. That was really the first empty nest. When I was at home and there were no kids at home, unless somebody was sick, nobody at home. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can get old figuring out what color scheme I want in a different room today, or I don't know, going out to the movies. But I really wanted to work and see what things were like. So got a job at the Y, did that for 6 years. I turned 12. Music therapy was the next step. So that feeling of empty nester has been one that slowly crept up, didn't just happen overnight, more and more time. And now the whole day to ourselves. It's fabulous. I love it. It's just wonderful.
At some point, all parents, however many kids they may have at home, are going to become empty nesters. Some moms and have some fear of. They're also looking forward to it. But you and I talked about this before. Some parents, and I'm focusing on the moms, who, in general, all due respect to dads, are the gatekeepers of this process. And while they may look forward to it, at the same time, I've had moms say, Dan, I feel like I'm missing a limb. Was this something that you and I talked about? Was that a phrase that came out? And your daughter, Dahlia, is only 2 months into her first year at Northeastern, one of the most competitive schools on the planet. 96,400 kids applied to Northeastern last year for the 2,500 spots on the Boston campus. Dahlia, early decision, was accepted immediately.
Yeah, that was great.
It's fantastic. I do want to talk, however, about the fact that Dahlia worked. So is Dahlia a dual national as well? Does she hold both Dutch?
Absolutely. Yep. Dutch and American. It's great because the Dutch, you have European citizenship. So that's
right. So they have that as well. And how is Dahlia's? She spent quite a lot of time going back and forth. And in fact, when we were going through this, one of the things that we explored was her potentially going to one of the Dutch universities instead of one of the American universities.
Yeah.
So she visited Utrecht. She visited University of Amsterdam. I think she looked at Rotterdam as well. And you, in fact, still own a home in Amsterdam. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's only 12 universities in the Netherlands, and they all are on the same page on the same day, which is like the French lycée system, which is great if you're traveling around a lot. In terms of you have to commit to a very specific major as you apply. You apply, for example, to Chinese, you can only go to one place, Leiden University, to do that. If you're going to engineering, there's 4, 5, or 6 that you can go to. Sure, they're all on the same page on the same day, but there's no real gradation in terms of great schools, bad schools. There are the 12 schools, and only 5% of people go to university-bound school, as it's called. But I think she didn't like the idea. The only thing that kept her from going to Holland was because it would have been so cheap, honestly. Dan, no offense, but for $1,000 in Holland, you can send your kid to university for a year compared to all it costs here. It's socialism. So it's a completely different bird over there. That what really kept her from going was just the idea that she would have to commit. And it's very hard in the Netherlands once you commit to do what's called a bridge class to change your focus. And she didn't like the thought of really committing to something so specifically. And no offense to the Dutch, but the weather there absolutely is terrible. 288 days of rain a year. It's not everyone's favorite place to be.
Having lived in Japan for 4 years and then on either side of my MBA, living about the same amount of time in Europe, and I like cloudy weather. Living in Los Angeles, where it's theoretically sunny all the time, I really like that overcast weather. But it does, for some people, cause that seasonal affective disorder.
That's right.
The weather, a lot of people do get bummed out by the weather.
Yeah.
But the system that you're talking about in some ways mimics the British school system, which is in the UK
It
and
does.
in
It
Canada as
does.
well. Once you're tracked, it's hard to jump, for lack of a better word, jump tracks.
Yes. When you're
Uh,
12 years old in the Netherlands, you take the CITO exam, and that is the initial sieve, shall we call it, and only 5 or 10% kids get pushed into university-bound schools. That would be HAVO and VWO and Gymnasium. Those still have access to university. And then 6 years, if you're in that top tier, 5 years of school, if you're in the next tier, everything's tiered. And it's just very hard to make the grade. Plus, if you don't make the grade in 1 year, you have to do the whole year over again. You can't just do the subject over again. So these very rigid requirements. So if you're, for example, not very good in math and you have a math requirement, it's too bad. You have to get that 6.2 to get to the next to the level. And there are many kids, sometimes they get stuck. They do 2 years, 3 years. After 3 years, you're done. They don't pay for it anymore.
yeah.
So it's a very rigorous system. And for people who are thinking about multiple things they'd like to do, perhaps when they get older, it can be very consuming and daunting.
To your point, it is a lot cheaper. A lot cheaper. By the way, I love how you said no offense. I don't take offense. I just to be clear, I didn't invent the American. I know it's coming as a shock to you. I didn't invent the American university system, but it's
No,
shockingly cheaper, and very often shockingly cheaper for Americans who go over there as well. Not
it
quite
is.
as expensive,
It is.
but
It is
in
cheaper.
the particularly in the Dutch school system, for the most part, you can take classes in English as well. It does help if you learn some Dutch, but just as
You really
in
don't
the
need
case of
that.
the German school system, you can take classes. I know a lot of parents freak out over the idea of going over
Yeah.
there, but the tracks aside, because very often STEM kids know what they want to study, and then they are able to stay in that track.
Yep. Yep. If you know
There's
what you
also,
want to study, it's great. If you're like, I want to study this branch of engineering and I want to do it at this university, and you can get your kid in, it's going to be a great ride. I mean, that's
and they're also going to come back if it's also a short flight. It's a quick hop if you're on the East Coast, and if you're thinking about if you're based on the East Coast like you are, and it's that versus California versus going to the Netherlands, it's a faster flight to the Netherlands to skip over than it
right.
is here.
Yeah.
In addition to the fact that when you're there, the cost of healthcare and everything else are just a lot less. And
Yeah.
the other thing that I've found for my mentees, there's only been a couple who have matriculated to Dutch schools and Heidelberg and a couple of the other places there. This isn't necessarily true of the British schools, is they come back speaking 4 or 5 languages. I mean, they do, right? They'll pick up Dutch, which is not as useful a language as, say, German or French, just because it's not as widely used. But you are constantly surrounded and bathing in students from all over the continent as well as other places.
Mhm.
Can you comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, in the Netherlands, when I left the Netherlands to come to the United States about 20 years ago, really Dutch was the predominant language in Amsterdam where I lived. But going back just recently, really 50% of the time you're on the street, you're hearing English or French or German, and only 50% of the time you hear Dutch. Most storekeepers now also speak really fluent English. I think that's just a result of the amount of media they get that's English focused. 16 million people, 18 million people, depending on if you define the Netherlands or the Netherlands and other Dutch speaking areas. That's just not a critical mass to produce 152,000 movies a year. It just doesn't happen. And a reason to learn Dutch is just because there's beautiful poetry written, beautiful
Stunning.
literature in Dutch. Like you have
Stunning.
Multatuli, who was really Belgian, but there's nothing like Multatuli. It's just absolutely. Elschot is another incredible writer that you read it and you get chills up your spine. And that's the reason to learn Dutch, I think, not to be able to buy cheese at the store. Do Dutch people like you more if you're American or hate you more? No, it's really the great melting pot. I think in a lot of ways it's a greater melting pot than we have here in America right now.
It is a recent observation that I had when going there. And I mean, I think a lot of Americans who haven't spent much time in Europe, or when they've gone on these go to Europe trips, they think these countries are very monolithic, but they're not. I mean, yes, you do see a lot of tall Dutch riding bicycles. God help if you're walking along in Amsterdam and you don't look both ways, you're going to get run down by a bicycle. You are, which is why Dutch people are just in incredible health. But you're also a stone's throw from the northern countries. You're an hour away from Norway which they say Norwegian is the easiest language for Americans to learn, not Spanish, Norwegian. And again, these languages start to blend together. They say it's easier to learn one language from another. So, naturally Spanish to Italian, but the more languages you learn, the more they break down. What's your thought on that? You speak so many languages and you've lived in so many countries. is it the fear that breaks that down, or is it just the natural bridges that you build, or what are your thoughts? Because you're so many things. You're a musician and a linguist,
I think that there's certain reasons that you're drawn to learn a particular language, like Italian. Oh my goodness, the operas. You've seen 20 operas. You want to be able to understand every word that they're singing because they're just so incredibly beautiful. Spanish has its own beautiful music and so many beautiful places. Every single country has reasons to learn the language that can be moving, and I think very much worth it. But we've got all European languages are still built on nouns, verbs, plurals, and a lot of conjugations, basically. Germanic languages work that way. And I think that really when like shifting to something like speaking Hebrew or Telugu for that matter, when you start sticking pieces of meaning onto words that become really long, then you experience something that you don't experience in Europe. To be able to ask somebody for a kilo of cheese in 8 different languages in the European Union, it's great. But that's not the kind of growth that you feel as when you go to a different country and you can listen to somebody singing Veena and you have an idea of what they're singing about. Just the structure of music in Indian music is so different with Sa Re Ga Pa Ma Da Ni Sa, and taking 15, 20 minutes to build up the scale before you start singing. And then it drives. It's just such a different way of doing music. Spanish music, dun, ga, da, dun, 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 completely different way of looking at reality than Hebrew music, that crying, moaning music, which the Chinese, the Mongolians have as well. So every music, every language is song in and of itself and is a different worldview and really makes you live multiple lives if you can enjoy them.
This is fascinating. Let's bring this home to roost for Dahlia, who is, before I get into my interpretations, can you describe, to whatever degree you can, talk about your daughter, who she is, what she's like. Let's have an unfettered discussion about.
An unfettered discussion. Great. I had 3 children in the Netherlands and was married to a very nice gentleman in the Netherlands. And my husband, Robert, was married to a very nice American woman. And they had 2 children in the United States. And we were in love from the time we were 22. And when we were 35 and both in marriage crisis, we decided to get back together. Now, Dan, that's a problem because one's living in Europe and the other's living in America. And one's got 3 kids over there and one's got 2 kids over there. So it was quite a journey to come together. But we did. We met in New York. And we both took whiles before getting divorced to really make sure it was the right decision for ourselves and for our children. And so Dahlia, not even conceived yet, would find herself eventually in a family that had 3 Dutch kids and 2 American kids and 2 parents that loved each other since they were 22. So she was a love child. And that really is a salient feature, I think, when I look at her. She has a great capacity to love and has a great capacity to bring these 2 families. She brought these 2 families together. And her ability to do that also is reflected in how she looks at learning. She's always willing to look at different cultures. She takes trips with her dad, not to Disney or with me, but to the Wall or to the Panama Canal or to the poorest part of Nicaragua or to the corners of China, the villages of India. We've always taken her to places that we say speak to the soul and are more lasting than a Barbie doll. I don't mean to downplay Barbie, but they're just things that she can carry with her that are unique and define the loving personality that she is, having compassion, seeing vulnerability, and being able to do that. So she's very attuned that way. And that's always been something that makes her different than the other kids that she's with. She's much less focused on, I want to be a popular kid. She really just doesn't care. She wants to be a kid who's informed and who knows what her choices are and who knows what consequences are. She's seen all her siblings grow up before her, and she's seen the mistakes that they made. She's thought, my oldest sister, she studied cultural studies. That was not a great move because she couldn't work in cultural studies. Let's see, my sister 2 above, she did photography. That was not a good choice either because she ended up taking pictures of people that were rich and famous that showed up at tanning salons. She really saw mistakes people made. Drugs, not a good idea. Let's not get a criminal record because that also can really affect you down the road. So she
Right.
really learned all these things. And in that way, she could be very supportive to her peers. She has those mentoring qualities because of the things she'd seen, the mistakes she'd seen. And instead of seeing them as defeatist, oh my gosh, my family is terrible, she learned as those, she looked at those as really unique learning moments. And she can also say to people, you're looking at it at this very Western way right now, but there's a really other way to look at it. Think of how people, my brother, he lives in China. Think of how his wife would think about it. I've heard her have those conversations with people, and I think that's an incredible gift that she's able to do that. And that stems from the love that Robert and I have always shared, the steps we took to be together, the risks we took to be together after being apart for 20 years, and bringing these two families together in a way that we did that was very loving and nurturing and supportive for all the kids. So yay Dahlia, yay us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yay me for having the great privilege of working with her. And you and I have had this discussion, and this came to roost. I began working with her at the beginning of her junior year.
Yeah.
And I'm still working with her as a freshman, and will continue to do so. When she comes to mentor with me as part of, for lack of a better word, my continuity program, she's in, just to contextualize where we are right now, she's in the first semester of her freshman year. And I don't encourage my freshmen, kids who are in their freshman year, the beginning of their freshman year, to be mentoring under me, mentoring 8th and 9th graders. It's too early. I want them to do well in their freshman year. It's also just unnatural for first semester freshmen to be doing anything other than studying, making friends, and just having a blast. And in this case, Dahlia is in Boston. You're in Pennsylvania. And Boston was her first choice of cities.
Yeah.
When she looked at it, was clearly her first choice of cities. We'll talk in a minute about your college search. She knew right away that was her jam. And she is, fair to say that she's a Renaissance woman in every sense of the word. She's an artist, a visual artist. She's a musician. She sings. We'll get into all of those different kinds of things. She just also has one of the most finely honed senses of the absurd. I don't have another way of putting it than that. In the way that I remember having a discussion. I remember her asking, this is not a curriculum-based, mentorship program that I have. I call it custom tailored, but it's different. And part of it is finding the mentee where they're at. Yes, we do work on block and tackle things like what's the right attack pattern for applying to different schools once we identify what those schools are, but it's also letting the mentee unpack in his or her own way. And I remember a discussion we had very early on where we were talking about schools and her grades. And she said, I need to stop here and ask you a question, because she was in the art room. You have an art room in your home in which Dahlia has been free to decorate the walls in any way that she wants with markers and things like that. And it's an astonishing room. It's just, if Salvador Dali and Picasso and just Coco the Chimp from the Yerkes Primate Center were all let loose into that room, they would just sit back and go, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah.
She stopped me and she said, I just need your opinion. How many dolphin ears would fit into this room? And seems like such a random question that other parents might go, oh, don't ask that question. It's so absurd. It made complete sense in the context of Dahlia. It was just such a Dahlia kind of question. And we leaned into it for a little while. She said, I've had enough of this question. Let's move on to something else. And it's just so defines who she is. She's so curious about everything. And she's able to parcel things out. But she worked with you. She did work with you in hospice, yes, as a kind of. Can you talk about that, because it came into play when she was in her website?
I wanted to piggyback on the dolphin question, and that's very typical Dahlia. And she tends to come up with those. One of the things we talk about in hospice a lot. I have an intern who has written a great thesis on humor in hospice, and I think speaking to the dolphin comment, Dahlia sometimes she's able to see that things that we take very seriously, when people get very serious, they're really not that important. Kind of reflective of, you've got this Western view, but you've also got all these different worldviews that you can use to filter reality. And when I started hospice, she said, Mom, what's it like singing to people that are dying? Isn't that scary? That's the standard question. People ask me that all the time. And I said, no, Dahlia, it's really wonderful to be able to walk into a room and make people more comfortable at a time when they're really vulnerable and afraid. And she goes, oh, I want to, what's that? And I said, why don't you come along? Right. I didn't intend for her initially to come along to the deathbed. My intention was for her to sing, for she enjoyed singing, and to sing for people On Saturday morning, we'd go to a facility and people would love seeing a young person singing songs. And she sings beautifully. I play the guitar. We'd do stuff together. We'd harmonize. 45 minutes later, we'd be back in the car. And we went to this one facility and she met this woman. She said, Mom, which of these ladies do you, most of them are ladies, which of these ladies are your patients? And I said, the lady over there, Helen's my patient. She said, I really like her. I'd like to see her one-on-one. Would that be okay? And so she started this relationship with this woman, Helen. And that was the beginning. It wasn't about singing. It was just, hey, Helen, how are you doing today? Did you have to use your oxygen 80% of the day? Were you able to talk to somebody today? Hey, Helen, there's these things on your window. What are those about? Did your grandkids, do you have grandkids? Where do they live? Oh, they live in Kansas. So you have them, but you don't see them very, all this stuff. And this kid's 12 years old and she's asking these questions.
Yeah.
And she had a relationship with Helen through COVID. And the last time she saw Helen, we weren't allowed to sing in the facility at that point. We hadn't been designated as essential workers. This is right in the very beginning where everything was just shut down. And Helen was dying. And the facility opened the window and Dahlia talked to Helen through the window for 15 minutes and she died half an hour later. But Dahlia was the last person that she talked to. And it was a really moving thing, I think, for Dahlia. She realized, now she understood, it's not scary to be with somebody when they die. It's a wonderful thing. Her kids from Kansas weren't there. Her children weren't there. The facility was down to bare bone in terms of staff, but there we were outside the window and she was holding this woman's hand as she was heading into the great beyond, the final journey. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. They were buddies.
It's a stunning thing. And I don't think I'm spoiling, because I've had Dahlia's permission to talk about this moment in which she talked about, this was during COVID, in which, and I think the phrase was, my sneakers crunched, the gravel beneath my sneakers crunched as I leaned up to sing through the windows as the curtains fluttered to Helen. And it's a great example of not how to stand out in an application, but it was uniquely Dahlia. Nobody but Dahlia could have crystallized this moment in such a beautiful way. And it illustrated how she'd made this her very own. Yes, she learned this experience through this wonderful opportunity to work with her mom and bring this along, a very unusual opportunity for any young person, but particularly Dahlia, and integrate these things that she loved in her life, singing, being with other people, empathizing. She's incredibly empathic.
Yes.
Way beyond her years in so many ways, but also a kid. Case in point, the dolphin ears. And when I pointed out to her, I'm not sure dolphins have ears, and she leaned in and she said, Dan, that's just besides the point. This is just like who she is. And very, very case in point, how these mentorship things are. She understood that yes, I'm older than she is, but it's not top down. Mentorships can be bottom up because she's feeding me back things that are relevant to her. It can also be side to side, the dojo model. And this is how, for lack of a better word, the three pillars of the program, the entrepreneurship piece, which she went into kind of, I don't want to learn business. And what is she now taking some classes in? Business, because we are all in the business of being ourselves. She's in the business of being Dahlia Broberg. Communication skills, and she's an off the charts communicator. She communicates easily at the college, sophomore, or junior level. And then mentorship and the ability to take those forward.
I think that's really important. That idea of, when she was having conversations with Helen, I'd sit on the side in the hallway just to make it legal. I was always astounded at how there was no top and there was no bottom. Helen would ask really difficult questions, challenging, as we call them, end of life questions. Are you going to think about me when I'm gone? Because I don't know if anyone's going to think about me. And then I'd hear Dahlia ask her questions like, to Helen, I gave you that wool blanket for Christmas. Did you like it? And then Helen would say, I liked you giving it to me on Christmas Day more than I liked anything else I've had in the last 10 years. Stuff like that. Really just gut-wrenching, beautiful stuff together. And I think that is really an innate part of true learning, is being able to look at your teachers and look at your friends and look at your family and see them on an even playing field without that judgment of nobody of good or bad, or even grades. She saw way past grades. When she was 12 years old, she was faking her grades on I wouldn't say she skipped class, but she would make up her A's and we would look at them on her phone, and we actually believed her until we got a call from the teacher And then later she's like, I can get good grades. Why wouldn't I do it? Like, someone's actually really going to look at it then and see my real grades, so I might as well. But just seeing what's important, what's not important. And she always saw through that fashion being important, or makeup being important, or Helen couldn't do anything in bed. She was on a respirator all the time, but she still saw Helen as being important because what she had to say was important. And Helen gave her more insight into the nature of being than her teachers did, or than I did. And that's why she liked to spend time with her.
Yeah, beautifully said. And I think that in a world in which, and you and I have spoken about this before, in a world in which there's so many distractions and it's really rare to be listened to, particularly as a young person and heard. Yes, particularly as a teenager, in which, phones are a distraction. How many times have you seen, even with adults, they're listening, but they're holding their phone or they're thinking about, and that's really important. They're going to be thinking about, what am I going to binge on Netflix tonight? It's just how we are with so many distractions. Dahlia's got this rare ability to like really lean in and listen. It's almost like on that, when you're editing a photo in an app on your phone, tuning in that vignette thing. And I think Dahlia really gets that. And it may be a function of how you raised her. It may just be a natural function of how she is, but as a person, and her being beyond her years. But when it started out with this, I don't want to know about business. That's not part of who I am as an artist and a painter and a singer. And we'll get to School of Rock in a minute. When it got closer and she'd been accepted to Northeastern, and she was offered a very substantial merit-based financial aid package, which was wonderful. We didn't really see it coming. We hoped it was going to come. Her grades were killer. Her scores, her test scores were killer, but it was more than that. It was the applications. And I do want to rewind and talk about the fact that, like many students applying, there was a lot of Sturm und Drang and angst and panic in that process. And her saying to me something along the lines of, I just want to skip this and get into school. And that would be the equivalent of, I want to lose 50 pounds, but do it with everything short of diet and exercise. And I did point this out to her. And this is at a time, and this is why I'm moving back, the crafting of the narrative and the crafting of the basic essays process by year. She was very instrumental in helping me. And I asked her, I said, if we could do this again, what would you do? She said, I wish we could have started this. Of course, you came in when I was a junior, when we began.
Yeah.
So again, this is a great example of how just exceptional mentees like Dahlia have helped with that process, are going to help a lot of other people along the way, which is something that I think brings her great.
I do want to interject though here that it's not just a function of Dahlia. We're talking a lot about Dahlia, but really there was a shift in dynamics when you started playing an important role in her life. And I think that was critical in terms of where the bus stopped in the end, in terms of her being able to voice where she wanted to go and really figuring out what it was that she wanted to, the road that she wanted to take upon arriving in Northeastern. And that's not a bus I could have steered with her or wanted to steer with her.
How did that, and thank you for your very kind words. How did that, I do want to back up for a second, and I'm very grateful for your saying that. It's very kind of you. When we first talked about working with Dahlia, and she was in on that call, and leaning in and smiling in her very Dahlia way with those incredibly bright blue eyes and her very specific look. She's just, everything about her just radiates joy and curiosity and silliness, but also that I'm lasering in on you, Dan Hewlin. Like I see you and I'm judging you. In the world, don't be judged. Well, she judges. And it was like, I saw her as a peer. Very often I do this with several of my mentors, but with Dahlia, it was very often I talked to her peer. I was very clear with her. And she'd say, I'm more than a peer. I'm ahead of you. And I'd be like, I have no objections to that at all. Age isn't a factor in this. And it's very much a function of how she is. But you and Robert had said, listen, without putting too fine a point on this, given the outcomes of our other children, all of whom we love, we would love for Dahlia to figure out a way that she can come out and be self-supportive.
Exactly.
In a city like Boston, and there's really no American city that is inexpensive to live in, but in the cities that she likes, Boston, Philadelphia, her home city now, it's expensive to live. What used to be $100,000 salaries, that's break even right now. And my comment back was, based on the skills that I see, I land on this in a lot of my talks, and we talked about this before. The great speaker Zig Ziglar in the 80s used to say, you can have anything you want in life if you help other people get what you want. And it really stuck with Dahlia. I remember her coming back and saying the Zig. As the Zig said, And she embodied that. And Dahlia, hadn't thought about that until I started working with Helen and with other kids and being part of School of Rock, which I want to talk about now, that the things I love the most are things that help other people. And they help me. There's a circular process. So let's talk about her singing for a moment. She's an incredible singer and musician. Let's talk about School of Rock and what that is. Can you tell us what School of Rock is and the role that played in her life and in your life and her tours? And then we'll come back. So
Sure.
many people don't know what that is. Let's talk about that.
So there's hundreds of schools of rock across the United States. They're franchises organized in 6 regions. And basically, whoever thought of it just thought of a great model. You basically are in a band that they put together. You can choose from among 6 to 10. If you can learn to be in the Beatles band. And you only study that kind of music for about 12 weeks, and then you put on a show, if you're ready or not, with the other kids. So you're in a group with 15 people. You come up with a playlist of 25 songs. Each kid is in a bunch of songs with 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 kids on the stage at a time. And the director says, what song you want to be in, kind of weighs in who gets to do what. And at the end, there's the show. And so to get ready for that show, you take lessons. So it's almost like inquiry-based learning. You have a question, which is, what does ZZ Top sound like? Okay, I'm going to be in the ZZ Top band. How do I play like ZZ Top? Now, that kind of thing. It's really goal-driven, performance-driven. And there are kids who just, the first time they do it, they just sit in the back and they go do, wop, and that's all they do. But then they've done a show and they get addicted because it is an addiction. They do 2 shows. And then they are in another show. And many kids do 2 shows per semester. I think there's a cap on 3 or so. And Dahlia started at a certain point, and I wouldn't say it was love at first sight, but it was love at second sight. She did 1 or 2 shows, and then she was like, wow, this is, because she'd been singing for years with me, let me call you sweetheart, that kind of stuff. And suddenly she's singing, so that took some time for the voice to develop, to be able to have that kind of ability to project and to belt songs and to not have that break in your voice. And we supported her not only with a teacher at School of Rock, but she also had private music teacher who I really hired just so that Dolly wouldn't kill her voice, basically, by the time
What you can do to destroy your voice as a teenager by
it's so intense. These kids sing these songs that you're just like, I can't imagine singing these songs. They hold out screaming notes for a minute or 2. Anyway, she just loved it. And really, it became a chance for her not only to study styles that I'm classically trained. We did the oldies stuff for show tunes for all those oldies. But now suddenly she was looking at American music in a very different way. And she was really choosing shows that she knew nothing about. Who's Led Zeppelin? I have no idea. Guns N' Roses. I mean, it was like a whole new window. And the interesting thing is she ends up learning a lot of the songs that I loved in the 70s and 80s. I'm like, hey, Dahlia, you're singing the same songs I sang in high school. She'd be like, oh, shut up, Mom. But I love going to the shows. Before me, I think a few years ago, she auditioned for the traveling band, which is called the Delta Squad. And now she's traveling the weekends, doing shows here. And then she ends up in the best of the best, the national band, because then they have competitions between the 350 schools and they come up with these 6 bands for the 6 areas. She ends up performing not only in Chicago for 10 days this summer, but then also in Texas for 10 days. And it's 2 different groups of kids, and these are really good kids because they need a week to get ready. And then they put on 24 shows back to back, morning, afternoon kind of thing, evening. And she just loved it. I saw her in Texas. I was on the tour in Chicago in the bus with the kids for 10 days, which was really fun.
You were sending me photos, and this is also a chance for her to see some schools that she'd ruled out. Like she had ruled out University of Chicago, even though I tried to urge her to look at it. I'm not going to Chicago. And I remember you're sending me a photo from Chicago. She'd already applied early and been accepted at that point to Northeastern, which was the perfect school for her. It's a perfect school for her. They're very fortunate to have her there. But she wrote me, there's a text that I still have of you and Dahlia there on the beach in Chicago. It's one of the few, I think it might have been a good place to apply. And when I wrote her back, she's got the winters would have been brutal. Cincinnati, Houston, and you were constantly sending me clips. But to the music she's singing, Black Dog by Zeppelin, she's singing Aretha, her range is incredible. And the other thing that I did want to point out, because it may not come up in this, is that Dahlia was extremely active in organizing sequencing the songs. And as somebody who's played in a lot of bands and a lot of piano bars, because I'm one of those odd ducks, I've talked about this, who played piano all his life and cannot read a single note. And I just love what I do, playing in Japan and Europe. Dahlia can read, she's got the whole thing down, but her band, that is a tight band. They look teenagers, they got t-shirts and jelly stains and the whole thing.
Yeah.
That band is a killer band.
Yeah,
And
but
when
she's
she went
very
on the road,
supportive, even the kids that, so one of the things that Delta Squad does, once you're in that traveling band, you're expected to be in 2 other shows besides being in the Delta Squad band, where you mentor the younger kids. So you go into a band where they don't have a good singer. They've got 4 kids in that group of 15 who cannot sing for beans. But you go there and you sing along with them, or you sing backup with them, or you take turns to make the songs doable for these younger kids. And of course, the songs are carefully selected, but that really shifted things as well. It's different when you're in a band and you're learning stuff. It's really different than being with younger kids and singing a song to help that young kid look good. And that's the thing she really liked doing the best of anything. She said, "Oh, Mom, when you see the show on Saturday, you watch Amy. She couldn't sing a thing when she started, but watch her." And then you watch Amy and you're like, wow, Amy can sing a bit now, which is great.
It was a beautiful thing to see, because Dahlia is the lead singer for that. And it would be very easy for her to take that, I'm the lead singer, and she's killing it. And very often she'd walk to the front of the stage. So many pictures of her reaching down and touching hands for
Yeah.
She's got a big following, a lot of people yelling, and she's got her own singing and dancing and movement style. She's really cultivated her own thing. She's in fact in a band now in Boston, right?
That was so amazing to me. So she went up to Northeastern, and I thought, close the door, School of Rock, new beginning and all that. And she said, "Mom, I'm going to apply for the a cappella group." And I thought, old people music, it's not going to work. Mom, he's making eyes at me, that kind of thing. I'm like, okay, whatever. And then a week later, she called up. She said, I tried out for the Northeastern rock band just for fun, and I love it. I'm like, okay, that's great.
She is loving it. I haven't had the opportunity to see her yet, although soon I will start seeing her on a more regular basis, as it's different for the continuity program, because it's more about kind of tent pulling along the way where her choices are. And for a school like Northeastern that has what I think they call their co-op program, where it's
co-op program.
You figure out, every school has its own flavor. And Northeastern, that was one of the great reasons for her going there, where she has a stronger focus on what she'd like to do, international and some business, and how that all comes together. It's still not 100% clear. And I think it's great that it's not where the career, or rather series thereof, is going to land, but with her constellation of talents and loves and some things that she doesn't quite know that she might like yet. This was the perfect reason to go. This is a great chance for us to shift to that wonderful trip you made last summer, in which you shared every day which schools she liked, which schools she didn't. I remember her writing, and I don't want to insult the school, "This school is lame. I don't like this school." Great school, but just not the right fit for her. But talk a little bit about that tour. It was the New England, it was the up and down the East Coast tour. Share a little bit about the dynamic of that.
That tour was preceded by the California tour. So we have a house in San Francisco, and she has these ideal memories of Strawberry Music Festival that we used to go to all the time in California, and the house in San Francisco being beautiful on the hill and all that kind of wonderful stuff in the Bernal Heights area. And we have family in LA. So she's always had raw to California, seen it as vacation terrain. And so she went there first, and she visited some schools there, and she said, "Oh, I like what was it?
USC. I think USC.
USC. She said, "I love USC." And I'm thinking, okay, it's USC, it's USC. And then I read good things about it. And then a couple of weeks later, we did the Northeastern tour, and I think we toured 10 schools. And it became really clear really quickly what she liked and what she didn't like. So Robert and I are both Ivy League people, and it's been between the two of us, University of Pennsylvania, Columbia, Harvard. We've touched them all in different ways.
What about the slackers, you guys? Are crazy, right?
So it was like, so I kept thinking in my mind the whole time, and you try to let her go, but I kept thinking, well, we're going to see Brown tomorrow. She's going to love it. We're going to see Harvard. She's going to love it. And it quickly became apparent that she didn't love it. She'd already not loved University of Pennsylvania. And so that was something that was on some level hard to swallow, for lack of better words, that I kept thinking, oh,
How
it's like
because it didn't
because
match what
because
you
it's where
expected?
it's who I am. It's where I started. It for me that the Ivy League was a stepping stone to a whole different level of being accepted. When I went to Wisconsin, it was like, oh, Wisconsin, Midwest, whatever, yeah, whatever. But I met you at UPenn, and you doing the Wharton thing, and we were the only two people that were in Carlos Fuentes's
Yes.
stellar,
I felt the
Nobel
honors
Prize
English
in
program,
literature.
knocking out
You
50
were the,
pages of fiction a week. Yeah.
yeah,
But at the time, I had no idea I'd go to business school. That was years later, but we had such a wonderful experience. You and other people in the Rare Books Library, and this is where you and I
that's exactly right.
met and cultivated our friendship.
They were all English people, and we were just like floater kind of people. But we had that opportunity, and we had that opportunity because it was the University of Pennsylvania, because it drew people. I can still remember some of my professors and just the level of caliber. I love Wisconsin. It was a great school for me when I left high school. I was going to study math, but the University of Pennsylvania opened doors for me later that I hadn't really realized they
And
would.
you transferred, just to be clear, you transferred.
Yes, after 2 years at Wisconsin, I wanted to be closer to home. And my parents had gotten divorced, and I wanted to be closer to my siblings because they were having a hard time. So I went to UPenn. And UPenn Boston is doable, but Wisconsin Boston was much, much harder to swing. So yeah, so that was really the motivating factor. And I wanted that for her. I wanted the name to mean something. And she educated me. She basically said, it's not about the name, Mom. You have to let that go. That's the same as wanting to have clothes because Kim Kardashian wears them. That's not real, Mom. You have to go to a place that's real and that means something to you. And I thought,
Right.
can't argue with that. And so, yeah, that was really, I could really tell really quickly on that Eastern tour that even though she had really great chance of getting into Harvard with all her grades and all her good stuff, that's just not something that she wanted. And if you asked her why, I love this place. I would really, I'd be walking with her and I pretend I didn't care, just whatever. And then,
Pretending you don't care is not your strong suit, Pauline. I
oh,
love
come
you
on.
dearly as a friend, but pretending you don't care is
Oh,
not
Dan.
great is your strong suit.
It was
But
only when we got back in the car that I'd say, so Dahlia, what'd you think? But I already knew what she'd think because her body language, when she just
right.
was just looking at stuff going, oh, who cares? Like with the tours, as soon as the tour guy started with, I'm in this club and I'm in this club and I'm in this club. And they said that in 20 seconds, just like spewing out the one club and the one social thing after the other. And she was like the club name dropping kind of thing. She was already turned off. You could just see. And the kid that gave the Northeastern tour, he was just like, hey, if you know what you want to do, this is the place to be. If you don't know what you want to do, this is the place to be. And she was like, where are we going first? I could just see it. Suddenly she's up at the front of the group. She's walking along with him. And
Right.
I thought, oh, here we go. But it was the best choice for her, for sure.
No, it was absolutely the best school. And this very often lands, and we talked about this in the very beginning, and you and Robert weren't, to your credit, attached to the result. You had some hopes and dreams as to that you wanted her to get into a school that would be in which I think one of the ROIs in college is not just you invest a lot of money and financial resources, even assuming infinite financial resources, it's 4 years of your child's life. So part of the ROI, and I'm curious to get your hit on this, is not just the return on investment and your child coming out and getting a job that pays a lot or where they have a lifetime of debt, but it's the people whom you meet. Case in point, yes, you have these friends for life, but it's also got to be a great fit. And sometimes fit is just a matter of not just the courses they have, but you step on campus and you know right away, this is my jam, it's not. And my recollection on Harvard was that it wasn't as strong, and I say this with respect to Harvard, everybody in my family, except me, went to Harvard. I'm the black sheep of my family, but I did want to get out of Boston. I went to high school in Cambridge. It's a fantastic city within Boston, but I wanted to have a different experience. My recollection with Harvard was that it wasn't some intense hatred. It didn't feel, I recall her saying, it just doesn't feel like me, Dan.
Yeah.
And when she went to Northeastern, it was instant, just, I love it. Like, it resonated with me. I loved it. B was going to be, it became very clear. My other recollection is that when you went a little bit further south to Brown, she also really liked Brown. What was the hit on Brown? But refresh my memory.
She didn't like the tour guide of Brown, but what she liked, what she really liked.
She hated the tour guide.
No, she hated the tour guide, but she was struck by the art. And she'd walk around the campus, Boston College. Every building looks like every building, but at Brown, there's stunning art in buildings and walls that you don't expect. It just was a surprising. Maybe that's how, because of the proximity to Rhode Island School of Design, I'm not sure, but there was definitely an arty feel to the place, to the town. And it felt like a town. It didn't feel like a big city. And I think those things just drew her. She'd walk by places and she'd hear bands playing and she'd be like, oh, I can imagine
Right.
myself here. You could just see the cogs turning. So she
Exactly.
liked Brown, but in the end, she loved Northeastern. And that was it.
She did. She did. And this gets to a kind of a block and tackle question. And I'm very curious to hear your hit. And we had this discussion as we got closer. And we did work on the applications during the summer, which was not Dahlia's first choice. She wanted to enjoy her summer. And I'm not sure that enjoying one's summer is mutually exclusive with getting the applications out. And she certainly wasn't last minute on it, but I do recall a lot of it wasn't pleasant. And I'm not saying that writing your applications, your essays has to be pleasant, but the earlier you get started, the better.
Yeah.
And there was some resistance. And I think the resistance comes, and I want to get your reaction as a mom. You have to be vulnerable. You have to lean in and say, like, what is my story? And that's very tough for a 16, 17-year-old to say, like, what's the story?
Yeah. So I think the resistance really came from the upstairs, watching her brothers and sisters before her. We hired writing coaches for them. That was a lot of it was the coach recommending how to write it to get in.
Yeah.
And with you, it was a completely different experience. But I think there was a tension between thinking she had to write it to get in, as opposed to showing the school who she was and why she was a good fit and why that was a mutual thing and going to be beneficial for both. And I think that she was hesitant initially to embrace your vision, which was you just want to show them who you are. You want them to hear that snow under your feet that you told me about with Helen Hayes. That's what you want to do. And in the end, at a certain point, as they say, the quarter dropped and she was like, I'm just going to tell it like it is. And I don't know if you recall, but there were points where she was doing drafts and she would say, Dan thinks I should do this. But by this time, she was so strong internally in terms of the vision that you've given her that she said, that's not how I want to end it. I'm going to say exactly like I see it. I'm going to make my point. And she did. And that's what made her essay so incredible. She didn't share it with me until it was completely done. And, I'd say, I can help you. She'd be like, Mom, I so got this. I know where I want to go.
No, absolutely. And this gets to
what I want to tell them.
No, this gets to that healthy differentiation where kids are growing away from their parents and they want their help, but they want independence, but they don't. And we talked about this draft, and I think she came back at one point. This was about 2 months before she actually started getting the essays ready and said, I know, Dan, that you want me to do drafts. And I said, let's be clear on the perception versus the reality. So you can do these as mind maps. You can read these into your phone. There's no one way to do this. This is based on a perception. If this is like how she helped me find the way that was right for her to do these. And the embedded writing lesson is, she's already an incredibly powerful writer. The embedded writing lesson is less is more. You, Dahlia, ought to see yourself, should prefer to see yourself as opposed to the shoulds. As much the buyer as the seller. Any school, and I mean this is a platitude, is going to be incredibly fortunate to have you on board. And as soon as she was able to see that paradigm shift, she's like, you know what, I get it. There's no arrogance in that, but there are only X number of spots, but somebody's taking those slots. Right. And because it feels so right for me, it ought to feel so right for them. And where this came, I think, again, where it landed was, okay, I do want to make a choice on early decision, which is a binding thing. And you and I had these discussions about, you made a call to me and you said, I'd really like to find out what would Harvard or other schools have accepted her. And I said,
that was about me.
This was about you. And a very fair question. And unfortunately, when you were admitted early decision, and she got right away. And I remember that night when you called and we chose, when you hit submit, you wait. And then when you're admitted, they say you're admitted and there's confetti, and you shared that with me. And it was a really joyous evening, laughing and crying. It was a wonderful evening. Yeah. But you then called and you were like, can we find out if Harvard's going to admit her? And I said, you can't. My suspicion was, my recollection was that she received what are they called? Likely letters. Schools will send out likely letters. Kind of the early version of get a likely letter from Harvard? I think she did get
Yeah,
a
we
likely.
did.
Yeah,
And
it
when
goes
we got the likely
likely from
letter,
1 to 5, and I think she got a likely one, which is basically their way of saying we're gonna you're pretty much in, but we can't tell you that. And I think she got a
right.
likely too, which is as close.
She got likely letters from almost most of the places.
She did, and I think from Brown as well. And I think that, and without name dropping on these, we had this discussion because she could have retracted the application.
Yeah, she could have at that point.
Look, it's all about. It's really less about where you go. It is not about where you go. It's how about you show up where you go. What is,
Right.
and there wasn't. It was the shortest measurable unit of time. It's hands down Northeastern,
Yeah.
and she's killing it there right now. And it's not that I don't think she could have done the same at Harvard or another school or Wisconsin or Penn. Right? It's not that. It's that this is in her heart. And it's not just that this is in her heart. You talked about how she was so generously sharing the experience she had on stage with the other people that are on stage. She's as Malcolm Gladwell would put it in his just incredible, and you and I both love Gladwell in his book, The Tipping Point. She's a connector. She's a natural connector. She connects internally. She connects with other people. And this is so one of the things that I just, that makes what I do just such an incredible joy. Dahlia teaches me like my mentors do. Yes, I try to fold space for my mentors by telling them these are things that didn't work for me that I would have preferred to do earlier in life. So let me try and fold 10 years or 20 years of my life in ways that may or may not work for you. And Dahlia's very clear in saying that's very helpful. And other times you're full of crap. I'm going to go do it my way. And that's great because that's her mode of thinking. And then other times she'll come back and let's try it anyway. But without making sweeping generalizations, which I never ever make sweeping generalizations, that may be her Dutch stubborn side. Either way, it's Dahlia. And this was reflected in all of her applications, not just her core Common App application, because I don't think she applied to any other schools with other ecosystems. She didn't apply to MIT, which has its own UC. She applied to the Common App. But each school has its own. If the school was the planet, the supplemental essays are the orbiting moons. And the care with which she put together her letters of recommendation and her supplemental essays and her extracurricular activities descriptions, it all matched. It all held together. And I didn't even need to point out to her the fact that these are quicksand pits, that very often kids will dash off their supplementals or dash off their activity sections just because they're so exhausted. And even though she was exhausted at this point, because this comes exactly when kids are writing their finals at the end of their junior year, she went ahead and just crushed it. And I remember a night where she said,
She got better at it as she went along. Like I remember that there was much more resistance in the beginning. And then toward the end, when she was really tired, I said, Dahlia, you've already got all these things. Just like do them a second time. No one's going to do. No. She goes, Mom, the questions aren't the same. So of course I'm not going to do that. I'm like, okay.
But she was able to harvest the momentum, right? It's just like, it's again the analog of, and we talked about this in the beginning. There's only one of me, and so I'm only able to work with kids who are really exceptional. That's not a snobby thing. I can only take kids who, and here's the very definition of exceptional, and make them unstoppable throughout life. This is a lifelong thing, right? We talked about this. That college is only one step, a byproduct of what you do, and a very important byproduct. In fact, you and Robert asked, does it end when she goes to college? And I said, I hope not. I hope I'm going to, and this is built into what we do right now for so many reasons. She's going to go, she's a planet changer. Yeah. Fair. We talked about this in the very beginning. All of you are. But I think what's so beautiful is we know some ways that this is going to unpack. Music's always going to be a part of her life, but we don't know some of the other things. And so a month in, as much as you and Robert are enjoying being empty nesters, is it weird to not have her in the house? Are there times when you're like, it'd be cool if Dahlia saw this? Or are you like, no, we're glad she's not here? Or are there times when she's communicating with you, not communicating with you?
Yeah, so I believe, in communicating, not with words, but so I'll send her pictures every day. I'll send her a picture. And it's not like the beautiful sunset, but I know it's something that's in her room or outside, or Robert has dahlias planted all over the property, different states of dahlias. Yeah, he's trying to keep the dahlias right now from not freezing. So they look like Halloween ghosts because he puts sheets over them and stuff. I send her things like that are very meaningful. Oh, her favorite candy bar that's still on the shelf. And it's really telling her, I notice you're not here. I see things in my reality that reflect to me that you're not here, but you're close to me at the same time. And that's really something I do in hospice all the time as well. Your mom's dying, she will always be close with you. My daughter's at college, but she's still really close to me. And I see that as a strength and not as something that makes me feel sad.
Yeah, beautifully
She
said.
sends me the same things as well. She'll send me things like, we're going up this weekend to see her. And she's, would it be okay if you and dad cooked for my friends? And I'm like, yeah, we'd love to do that. And she goes, I don't want to
So
do a
cool.
restaurant. I want you guys to cook for us. And we're like, sure, we'll do that. So
It's so cool.
an apartment that we can use. My mom has an apartment in Little Italy. It's right near Northeastern. Well, we're gonna have a blast.
That's not bad. You can't have a bad meal in the north end of Boston. I'm thinking about candy though for a second because there's a certain kind of candy and it's escaping me. It's only available in the Netherlands. Can you remember what it is? I can't remember.
Drop, DROP, yeah.
Yeah. And so Dahlia made a great point of telling me, describing it in detail. And I said, I can't really remember it. But when she was on one of her trips to the Netherlands, I think looking at some of the schools there, she was in a supermarket going, this is what I'm talking about. I know you didn't get it. And it was just, I probably have 20 photos of the different ones that she loved. And she came back with
There's all these different kinds she loves.
well, it's so Dahlia. It's so very specific. And she's like, I know you didn't get it. Yeah. And very often she sent me something last night with a photo of her and she and her friend. It's always the same expression. It's always there's that very thing. But and very often it's incomplete sentences. It'll be, it's almost like watching a performance down at the Groundlings it's not completing the sentence. It's just, she gets it. And we forged what I think is just an incredibly special relationship, which I think represents the kinds of relationships that she has forged by dint of what she had from you that we forged together and that she's taking out there into the world. I want to come back for a second to what your biggest fears were when we began working together, or when it came to her applying, her declaring a major, like all of those. If we can go back a couple of years.
Honestly, one of the biggest fears was that I thought she's going to work with this guy, Dan, that I met from college, and she's going to not be all in. She's going to think, oh, this is an extension of mom. He's going to tell her stuff, and she's going to tell him that she wants me to go to Harvard. And that was my biggest fear, that there would be that kind of enmeshed that she would perceive it that way. And that she didn't understand that I was handing my daughter over to you because I didn't want to go through the process again.
Right.
I've been through the process so many times. It's a part-time job. I'm working full-time as a hospice music therapist. I'm doing a doctoral degree. I got my hands full, and I just didn't want this work. And especially if you're doing it with your kid, there's always this, oh, mom, I know that kind of thing going on. And when you pass it on to somebody that you trust, there's none of that anymore. There's, did you see Dan? Yeah, I saw him today. It's just a totally different thing than, I saw daddy today, or somebody told me what to do today. It's just, there's an unfolding and unraveling, which is very different and exciting than when it's parent down. Did you do it? That it's coming up. The deadline's coming up. How come you're watching a movie when you haven't finished your essay? There's none of that stuff. And now you can really enjoy the senior year because there's so many wonderful things that happen senior year. For Dahlia and School Rock, there were tons of concerts. There was traveling. There was making all those nice trips to the East Coast and the West Coast and reliving old memories. And that was only possible because the college process was not in our hands. It was in her hands, and it was in your hands.
Yeah, and I was so grateful for that. But you never know in the beginning. And you and I we had close friendship in high school, but we hadn't seen each other for a long time. We were Facebook friends and we'd communicate from time to time, but it's such a wonderful thing to rekindle that. And then I got to know your remarkable husband, who's also pursuing his doctoral degree.
Yeah, he is.
Now coming out, so
we're having a bet to see who finishes first.
You're like who's
who's going to finish first?
Like the Boston Marathon, but with the PhD at the end.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm curious to know, though, your hit where it's and this gets back to the healthy differentiation. If you had been, because you can't be parent, my opinion is you can't be, banker, cook, chauffeur, disciplinarian, like all of those things at one time, and college advisor. Does that ring true to you, or what's your?
I think that college advising is such a terrifying thing in many ways. In the Netherlands, where I grew up, it really was, you define it yourself. When you're 12 years old, you take that C2 exam, and that's going to tell you what your options are, how you score. It's much more definitive than the SAT or the ACT. It's just, you get this number, You can go or you can't, or you go to the next level down, or the next level down, or the next level down.
Sure.
But here it's really different. There's a whole, let us get to know you. There's much wider field in terms of gradations, with excellence to semi-excellence to schools that are specialized in certain things. And so it's harder to be educated in that. It really, I think, is a specialty just to know what the salient features are of different programs and different universities and how they fit with certain kinds of kids, what their populations are like, the financial considerations, how far from home. It's a part-time job. And I really was so grateful that I could just enjoy her senior year and enjoy her journey of figuring it out. I loved when she said, I think I'm going to pull my eyeballs out if I had to do one more, I have to do one more essay. And I would just say, yep, I recognize that, but I didn't have to say anything else. It wasn't my
That was the
problem.
phrase. I'm gonna pull my eyeballs out if I have to do one more essay.
Yeah. That
And
was
rather than leaning, oh, poor Dahlia, no, I just let it sit. I just let it sit and let her hold one of her beloved stuffed animals.
yeah. But so it's easier if I've been holding that stuff in while saying, you got to clean your bathroom this weekend. Everything gets weird then if you're telling a kid too many things at the same time. It was just so easy just to stick to the routine. It was just so much more pleasant. I'm so glad that you mentored her. And I think that because it wasn't her dad and I, it made such a difference in terms of the things that the possibilities suddenly, because it wasn't from the beginning, oh, I got to keep feeding mom and dad's ego and doing what they want. It's, I got this person who's crazy and creative
No, and we were talking about me when it comes
and
to
has been in Japan and is just a genius working psychologically with kids for years, and then starts his own business in helping children do something he really believes in. She respected it. She understood it. She got it. And that made it just a wonderful journey for her, as opposed to top down, you got to do this from us. And by the way, we like Harvard best, you know?
Right, which was, listen, not an unrealistic thing. And we shared that she'd been to Japan before, I believe, and it's very much a second home for me, much like, China and India are second homes for you, and Europe is, parts of Europe are second homes for me. But she's a very well-traveled, cultured kid. And you have to travel to be a culture. Culture is a matter of, there's all different ways of defining culture, but you really nailed it with fit. College, where you end up at college, it's really a matter of fit, isn't it? And on so many levels, isn't it? Isn't that what you were talking about? And maybe you can speak a little bit more about that.
I think that where the college falls, there's always the tension between where it falls for the kid and where it falls for you. I think that for me, a turning point in terms of really being able to embrace that decision and to really see the fruits of her work with you was when, it sounds so trite, but one day she was online and she said, Mom, I want to get a whole bunch of Northeastern stuff. I go, what do you mean? What are you talking about? She goes, I want a t-shirt. I want to wear it to school. And it wasn't Kim Kardashian fashion, but it was a statement to the world. I made this right decision. This is who I am. This shirt fits. These shoes fit.
Yep.
These pants fit. And guess what? They all say Northeastern. And by chance, it was around this time that she was becoming fashion hungry on the Northeastern front that we really realized that my mother had gone to Northeastern, not when it was a really difficult school to go into, but that she'd done her master's there in music years beforehand. And suddenly it was as if the universe was saying to me, anyway, this was the right choice. Look how enthusiastic it is that this has become her fashion statement. And my mom is delighted. And we got family in Boston. Like, it's the perfect universe. We have an apartment.
It is a great. I don't know if she's reaching out to her family in Boston, although to be honest, like, college merch has gone from being $10 for a sweatshirt. It might as well be as expensive as Kardashian fashion. She sent me a photo of herself dressed. She had the beanie, the sweatshirt, the sweatpants, the whole thing. But she just was wearing it with such pride. And it was, it was just so, like, she was just glowing with it. But to come back to the I want to tear my eyeballs out statement. Thing, I leaned into it with her. I said, it wasn't like, tell me more about that. It wasn't the therapist thing. I said, and yet you need to do it. And you're already there. Like, you've gone through the most difficult parts, which doesn't mean you shouldn't be feeling that way. Where does it land? Like, do you hear the choices? you're going to finish it one way or the other. You know you're going to finish it. And do you want to enter your senior year with that much more on your plate? Or do you
Yeah.
want to just enter your senior year with as much off your plate as possible?
Yeah.
And she
That was a
said,
great selling point. Great.
I exactly. And she said, it irritates me so much that you ask me that, but I really care that you ask me that. And I said, there you
Because
go.
it's true, because
Well,
it's true. That's
right.
why.
If healthy, you've gone through your psych rotations as well, right? If
Yeah.
being resilient and if being healthy and whatever, emotionally healthy, whatever that means, is about containing opposing feelings within a safe bubble. Dan, I don't like you, but I do like you. Or Dan, that makes me uncomfortable, but it's comfortable. She's able to contain those. And I think at that age, it's an incredibly advanced emotional skill set to be able to hold. And she's still a kid hugging her big stuffed animals and bringing Daisy, your dog, into the whole thing and saying, maybe Daisy can come with me. Do you have any college advice for Daisy? I said, not at this moment, but I'll come up with stuff. Here's what I'm saying. The silly aspect of her was an important piece of the rocket fuel. It was a key piece of the rocket fuel. Yes.
Yeah.
And some kids, humor is
Yeah.
not a part of it, but in industry, this is just my hit. I'd like to ask you this question before asking my final too. In an industry in which there is not a lot of humor, I'm not sure it's quite as awful as or humorless as say the funeral parlor industry. No disrespect to that industry. Having a sense of humor and being able to make light of things and just seeing one way or the other it's going to be done, and maybe even having some humor there. Not trying to be Chuckles the Clown, but having. And I've said this before. If you can have an admissions officer smile or laugh and lean in and say, I must learn more. Just like the opening on her that just stunning essay where she was on her tiptoes and the gravel crunched beneath her toes. And I don't know that it was fine, but it certainly was a strong opener. And there isn't an AO alive who could have said, I gotta know more. I have to see.
That's so funny because of the tiptoes and stuff. No, so I'm tall, but she's much shorter.
She's very petite,
So
yeah.
when they opened the window, she literally couldn't see Helen unless
It was
she
little fingers. It was like little
her
fingers.
little fingers. So she stood on her tiptoes on this snow, and then the snow gave out beneath her because there was ice, and her tiptoes fell down, and now her eyes were only this, seeing Helen. And so, of course, we got her something to create her something to stand on eventually or whatever.
Right.
But that's
But it was a very
beautiful.
specific song. She talked about the very specific song. And without getting English teachery about it, it was such a specific moment.
Yeah.
And this is a lesson that, and we talked about this before, and you're a writer and you've taught, and we have so many things that are different about us and so many things that are similar about us. Creating that moment. So many kids, I think, out there have to create what they perceive as going to be the perfect thing. This is what admissions officers want to see.
So in terms of the perfect moment, there was the moment where she found out that she got in, which I'll never forget. So Robert was somewhere in the kitchen and Dahlia was in her room and I was across the way. And all of a sudden I just hear, I thought something terrible had happened. My first impression was, oh my God, who died? Or are all my kids okay? So I went over and she's on the floor and she looks up and she goes, oh my God, Mom, I got in. And as if the universe was flowing through my body, I started screaming in exactly the same note as she was screaming. So now it was a double F sharp. We were both, and now my husband comes running in and now he starts screaming in the F sharp. So it was an incredible moment.
You guys are an F sharp family.
And the tension released by that, it was laughter in a way, that by that humor of how ridiculous the moment was, all jumping up and down in the room and so excited. And here are two parents who really wanted their kids to go to Harvard, but we're so excited because she's so happy. And we know, that was having her work with you was really the right thing to do because of the joy in that moment.
It was so lovely. And if
we had been
called me after that, showing me the screen.
She wouldn't have been jumping up and down. She would have been like, okay, I got into Harvard. You guys happy?
It certainly wouldn't have been the same. So if you had any advice out there for moms and dads who are at the beginning of that journey, whether their kids are freshman or sophomore, or in Dahlia's case, like approaching their junior year and have the same sort of fears or in that pattern. And moms in India, moms in China, moms here. I work with a lot of kids from India or second, third generation kids. I work with kids from all over the world and here. But what would be your 3 best pieces of advice for families that are in
anybody,
uncertainty?
anybody living anywhere, And when you think about education, you can think about education in terms of it being top driven or bottom driven. So you have
Hmm.
people that say, like Bandura, they say you need a good model, you need a good teacher, and that leads to great learning outcomes. And then you have people that say, no, inquiry based, the child will drive him or herself, people like Montessori that have that kind of outlook. And I think what's really great about your approach, Dan, is that yours really does both at the same time. And so what I mean by that is it's child driven, but it's you, the expert driven. And so you take out of that equation in the education process the parents who have their own baggage, quite frankly, and their own traumas and their own worries, and who are living with the kid. And there's enough stress going on just by the fact that the kid's leaving the house, and you're worried if they're going to be able to take care of themselves someday down the road or whatever you're worried about. But that's really an ideal combination to create this safe space where you have somebody who's the expert and the mentor, and you have the child who has his needs that he can express to the mentor in a way that he can't or she can't express to the parent because they're afraid that it will be wrong or not what the parent wants. And so you completely take that out of the equation when you take somebody on who can guide your child through the process. And that's something, the power from the top and the power from the child from the bottom, working together to level the playing field, to really figure out what they want to do in a safe space, is the power of your kind of mentorship. And it speaks to all cultures.
I really appreciate that. And the final question I have is, and this is something that's been progressed has progressed along the way, is that yes, I was the mentor, she was the mentee, but there's this growth pattern along the way in which Dahlia, yes, was the mentee, she got in, but we are becoming peers in a way. She will hopefully be mentoring, not under me, with me, as part of the continuity program, which is when kids are in college, they are mentoring other kids from either the United States, other countries, ninth grade, 10th grade, and I pay them well because they deserve it. And this again drives home the fact that the ability to mentor, understand the concepts of entrepreneurship, communication, which are not mutually exclusive. They all go together in whatever field they choose, particularly Dahlia, who's a Renaissance woman, a polymath. What's your hit on that as Dahlia becomes the peer and in the Joseph Campbellian heroes or heroines journey model? What's your hit on that? I see I'm so proud of her and being able to work with her. And she's going to go on and with the understanding we all stand on the shoulders of giants. So in your case, in my case, one of the giants we stand on is Carlos Fuentes, who is the great Latin American novelist who we learned from. But I'm not a giant, but Dahlia stood on my shoulders, and there are people whom she's mentored already with the idea that we're going to go on and do this, but she will generate hundreds, if not thousands, of mentees of her own. And in turn, with the power of math, by the time she hits our age, many years hence, how does that impact for you? What are your thoughts around that?
No, I think one of the things I stress when people are dying, which are like universal messages, is that the person dying has had so many people love them, and they've loved so many people over the course of their life as well, that really a life is a function of the love that transpires during it. And I think that mentorship is much the same. There are many people that have invested their time and their love and energy in Dahlia. And similarly, there will be many people who she invests that time and love in. Mentorship is something that sometimes you have to step back from as a parent, that you say, now we're going to see where this goes with the college stuff, and really let the child choose. We believe enough in the child to say, this is what they want to do. And there's great mentorship in being able to accept what you say and being able to push back on what you say, a pushback that I believe really is much harder in a parent-child relationship.
Sure.
That once you've experienced that, once Dahlia experienced that through you and your mentorship, she's much more able to do that for other children. And she's excited because really going through the college process is daunting in many ways. And when you as a person, with the insight that you have, having worked with lots of people, and she being able to see the struggles of people who didn't have a mentor like you, can pass that on, those lessons on. Like when you write an essay, mean what you say and say what you mean. It sounds like a simple thing, but it can be very difficult to do. But she knows that now. She's experienced this through you, and that makes her able to pass it on. So mentorship begets mentorship. It's just the way that it works. And when you take the lessons that you can get out of the learning experience of applying to colleges, it really ups your ante in terms of being able to have a huge impact on people at such a vulnerable point in their lives.
Beautifully said. And just to end this, one of the things that she did, one of the things that was on her activity section, and again, the activity section and how that looks to an AO is just a byproduct of the joy that she puts into it. She was mentoring, I think it was 3 young ladies in art at a local school, was she not? I can't remember their names, but she used to come back and just rave about how much fun they had together, and they would joke. And I can't remember what they were creating, whether it was sculptures or paintings. I think it was paintings. Do you have any recollections about that and the stories?
Yeah, so all kids at the school that Dahlia goes to during their senior year, schools know that kids, once they know that they're in a college, they don't do squat anymore. And that usually happens by early spring, people figure it out. And so you're required in the month of May, June to do an internship. And so Dahlia could have done it with me. She could have done it at the University of Pennsylvania. We had a friend at MIT who would take her, but no, she wasn't going to do that. She'd seen the light, the Dahlia light through you. And basically what she decided to do was to devote maybe the last time in her life, because she was going to look for something that she could support herself with. She was going to have fun with art and inspiring kids through art and actually talking to kids about how they can, turn a profit on their art, because she has supported artists for many years. She'd work as a counselor at the Y, and then the money she'd made, she'd buy some artist t-shirt to support this artist and things like that. And she really loved that. She would come home and talk about, oh, today we did this. And Susie, she's making these silly puppets, but she realized she can make them out of socks. And you can sell socks like that, Mom. They're really cool.
It's monetizable, right? Again, it is a monetizable thing. And I remember the first time I brought monetizable up to Dahlia, she wrinkled her nose as though it was a dog poo. Ew. But monetizable, you can give that money to charity. There are things you can do. You can pay part of your college tuition with it. There's a lot to that.
Yeah, I think that I'd say there's really the idea in I think more well-to-do families that monetizing is not something you need to worry about or that you need to talk about, but you really do, especially if you have 9 kids. You really start at a certain point, you got to be able to take care of yourselves, because we're not
Right.
kids
That's
forever.
1.5 times the Brady Bunch, if I have my math.
I'm telling you, it's a lot.
It is a lot. I'll finish by saying this, and I hope there's no trademark infringement on saying this. One of the greatest gifts I ever received, I won't say who sent it to me, but the name rhymes with Pauline, is a t-shirt from Dahlia's tour with Dahlia singing on it. And it was a festival of emotions that went through my heart when I got that. And I wear it probably not too many times in public, because that person, Pauline, asked me not to. But I forged these incredible relationships with my mentees, not because it's part of what I do, but because this is my life's work. And I am so insanely proud of your daughter, as I am with so many of my mentees. What a blessing knowing you for all of these years. We won't say how long. It's been a minute. And working with Dahlia, and the work's going to keep on going.
And I really wanted to take this opportunity as well, Dan, to thank you. When I first saw your work on Facebook in passing as a mention, and many years ago, it stuck in my mind, and I thought, if we ever get to that point with one of the kids, I wouldn't mind doing it with Mr. Yulin. He's very kind, compassionate.
It was Mr. Yulin. It was
Mr.
Artistic. I go for Empress Pauline. So
oh my goodness!
We explore different titles with Dahlia as well.
And then years later, I thought, oh, with this kid, I don't want to. There was 8 years difference between Dahlia and the next one up. I'm like, I'm too old for this squid. Honestly, I just don't want to do this anymore. and she's going to drive the bus. So let's get somebody, a co-driver they'll make a beautiful trip together.
She drove it. I was the co-pilot. That was it. But
grateful. Very grateful.
Putting gas in the tank. I think we've taken that metaphor as far as it's going to go. There will be more calls like this. I can't wait to see you, Robert, in person in Philly, in Boston, perhaps in Osaka, Nagoya, wherever it ends up. And what a blessing. And thank you so much for blessing me with the gift of working with your daughter. And
thanks so much, Dan, for the blessing of having you in my life, Robert's life, making things easier and really helping Dahlia figure out where she really wanted to go. She wouldn't have done that without you. And she was ecstatic to go to a place where she feels at home.
Northeasterners so lucky to have her. Thanks so much. This is Pauline.
Welcome. And thank you. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it.
Much love, Pauline. Thank you so much. We'll talk soon. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.